On paper, this one looks simple. Lewis Hamilton hits George Russell on the opening lap at Spa, spins him into the gravel, and ends his race. The stewards find Hamilton wholly at fault, and they penalise him. Open and shut. So how did a clear-cut penalty turn into the most argued-about call of the entire weekend? How did Toto Wolff, Fred Vasseur, Martin Brundle, and Russell himself all end up on the same side, defending the driver who caused the crash? The car Hamilton hit belonged to a title rival, and that rival is the one telling everyone to leave Lewis alone. Nobody came to Spa this weekend expecting the loudest story to be a decision from the stewards. This was supposed to be about Kimi Antonelli on pole, about Ferrari trying to close the gap to Mercedes, about whether Hamilton could drag his car back into the fight at the one track he owns better than anyone else on the grid. Instead, the moment everyone is still arguing about happened on the first lap, at a corner called Les Cons, and it took the FIA about an hour to turn it into a firestorm. Here is what the stewards decided. Hamilton made contact with Russell on lap 1. Russell spun into the gravel and his race was finished before it had properly started. The stewards looked at it, ruled Hamilton wholly at fault, and gave him a 5-second time penalty. On its own, that reads like a routine racing incident penalty, the kind handed out a dozen times a season and forgotten by Tuesday. Except this one did not get forgotten, because within minutes of that ruling, the people who had every reason to pile on Hamilton did the opposite. The Ferrari pit wall called it harsh. The Mercedes pit wall, the team whose car was sitting wrecked in the gravel, called it a racing incident. And the driver in that wrecked car refused to say a single word against the man who put him there. When the victim is defending the culprit, you know the call touched a nerve. Let us go back to the lap itself, because the details are the whole argument. The lights go out, and the run down to Eau Rouge and up the hill is always chaos. By the time the field crests the top and hits the Kemmel Straight, Hamilton has the run. He pulls out and moves ahead of Russell down the longest, flat-out stretch on the calendar. Nothing controversial yet. This is just Spa doing what Spa does, cars slingshotting past each other at full tilt. The trouble starts at the end of that straight, at Les Cons, the tight right-left that has swallowed a career's worth of overtakes. It is one of the classic passing spots in the sport, but it is also one of the most unforgiving, because two cars arriving side by side at the end of the fastest straight in Formula One have almost no room to sort out who owns the corner. Get it slightly wrong, and there is nowhere to go. And Russell does not concede. Instead of tucking in behind, he swings around the outside and commits to the long way round. For a heartbeat, the two cars are side by side, Hamilton on the inside holding the tighter line, Russell hanging it around the outer edge with two wheels close to the runoff, both of them committed, neither one willing to lift. Then they touch. Hamilton's front left clips the right-hand side of Russell's Mercedes. It is not a big hit. There is no shower of carbon, no wall, no safety car scramble, but it is just enough. Russell's car snaps sideways, spins and slides backward into the gravel trap. He tries to gather it, tries to keep the engine alive, and for a second it looks like he might drag it back onto the circuit. He cannot. The car is beached, the session is gone, and one of the three Mercedes-powered title contenders is out of the Belgian Grand Prix on the opening lap. For Hamilton, the damage is invisible from the cockpit. He carries on, holds his position, and settles into the race. What he does not know yet is that the stewards are already pulling up the replay. And he has no idea that the next hour is about to define his entire weekend. The verdict, when it lands, is split straight down the middle, and that is the first clue this was never as simple as the headline made it sound. The stewards rule that Russell had earned the right to be there. He had pulled far enough alongside going into the corner that he was entitled to racing room, and Hamilton had to leave him space. So far, so normal. But then the stewards describe what actually happened inside Hamilton's car, and the whole thing tilts. They find that his Ferrari washed out into understeer at the worst possible moment, that the front of the car simply would not grip, and that Hamilton was already turning the wheel trying to avoid Russell when the contact happened. In their own account, he was trying to miss him and could not. That is the description of a car that would not do what its driver asked, not a reckless move from the driver himself. And yet the conclusion the stewards reach is that Hamilton was wholly at fault for the collision. Here is where it gets strange. Having decided he was entirely to blame, the stewards then went soft on the punishment. The standard penalty for causing a collision like this is 10 seconds. They cut it in half, down to 5, precisely because of everything they had just described, the avoidance attempt, the lost front end, the opening lap conditions. They added no penalty points to his license. And Hamilton served the 5 seconds during a virtual safety car period later in the race, which is the cheapest possible way to take a penalty, because the whole field is already crawling. The result: Hamilton lost almost nothing. He held on to finish fourth. So the FIA looked at a first lap tangle, called one driver completely guilty, and then handed down a punishment so light it barely touched him. You do not get a verdict that argues with itself like that unless the people writing it were not fully sure about it either. And if the stewards were unsure, the man they were supposedly protecting made it 100 times worse. Russell climbed out of that gravel trap having lost everything: his race, a likely points finish, and ground in the title fight he could not afford to give up, all of it gone in a single corner. The obvious move, the human move, is to point at the car that hit you and let the anger fly. Russell did the opposite. He said flatly that he was not going to blame Lewis. To him it was a racing incident, plain and simple. And he admitted Hamilton was more to blame than he was, but he was clear that Hamilton had not done anything reckless, that it was the kind of thing that happens when two cars go for the same piece of road at Spa. The driver, whose afternoon had just been wrecked, stood in front of the cameras and defended the driver who wrecked it. What made Russell furious was not Hamilton at all, it was his own car. On that Kemmel straight, his Mercedes had let him down, the power dropping away underneath him at the exact moment he needed it, and that is a battery and deployment problem that has haunted these cars all season. He was angrier at the machine than at the man, and then he said the line that told you how heavy this year has become for him. He said he was numb to the disappointment now, that when it keeps happening this often, you just get used to it. Sit with that for a second. A driver fighting for a world championship, taken out on lap 1, and the feeling in his voice was not rage, it was exhaustion. You would think a man who just lost all of that would want someone to pay for it. He did not. The FIA had now punished Hamilton for a crash the victim himself did not think deserved a penalty, and the rest of the paddock was only getting started. This was not just Hamilton and Russell anymore, it had become the whole grid against the stewards. Fred Vasseur did not hide behind diplomatic language. The Ferrari team principal called the penalty mega harsh, said that for him it was more of a racing incident than anything worth punishing, and pointed out that the ruling had cost his team a real chunk of points on a weekend where Ferrari could not afford to give any away. That is the culprit's boss, which you might expect. What you would not expect is the other side of the garage agreeing with him. Toto Wolff runs Mercedes. His driver was the one sitting in the gravel, and Wolff looked at the same replay and waved it off. He said Russell had gone for the outside line and that it should have been his corner, but that these things happen in wheel-to-wheel racing, whether you are fighting at the front, in the midfield, or at the back. From the man with the most reason to demand a penalty, that is about as close to a defense of Hamilton as you will ever hear. Then there is Martin Brundle. 40 years in and around this sport, a commentator who does not hand out free passes, and he said plainly that he was surprised by the penalty and that he would not have made that call. When Brundle raises an eyebrow at a steward's decision, the paddock listens. And Hamilton himself. His view was the simplest of all. He said it was a racing incident, and that he did not think there should be a penalty for it at all. So line them up. The victim, the victim's boss. The culprit, the culprit's boss. And one of the most respected voices in the commentary box. Every single one of them landed on the same side. All of them thought the FIA got it wrong. You would think that with that many people saying the same thing, somebody in race control might have paused. Nobody did. Now, to be fair, not everyone in the sport waved it away, and the strongest argument for the penalty is worth putting on the table, because it is the reason the stewards ruled the way they did. On the Sky broadcast, Karun Chandhok broke the incident down frame by frame and made the case that Russell was the innocent party. His point was that Russell had done nothing wrong. He had committed to the outside line, he had left racing room, and he was exactly where he was allowed to be. The contact came from Hamilton losing the front of his Ferrari in the dirty air behind Max Verstappen. And if you lose the front and hit someone who is entitled to be there, the blame lands on you, whether you meant it or not. That is a clean argument. It is basically the steward's logic in plain English. Fault does not require intent. If your car washes out and takes another driver off the road, you are the one who caused it. But here is the problem with hanging the whole thing on that. Nobody is really arguing that Hamilton did not cause the contact. Even Russell admits Hamilton was more to blame. The argument is whether a first-lap tangle at Spa, in a car that would not turn, is the kind of thing that deserves a penalty in the first place. And on that question, the innocent party sided with the guilty one. All right. Here is where the weekend gets genuinely strange, and where the idea that the FIA somehow had it in for Hamilton falls completely apart, because the same officials who nailed him for the Russell crash turned around, looked at a second incident involving his car, and did the exact opposite barely an hour later. To see how, you have to follow Ferrari through what was quietly one of the messiest weekends they have had in a long time. Look at the scale of it. 3 separate trips to the stewards across the weekend, for 3 completely different reasons, and every one of them landed on the same 2 red cars. Only one of those 3 actually stuck to Hamilton himself. Spa had been a paperwork nightmare for Ferrari from the start. On Friday, before a wheel had turned in anger, the team was fined €10,000, 5,000 for each car, because they failed to return a set of tyres to Pirelli the way the rules demand. A small thing, a procedural slip, but it set the tone for the whole weekend. Both Hamilton and Leclerc were named in it. When Hamilton pitted to serve his penalty under that virtual safety car, he was released from his box while a Ferrari mechanic was still leaning over the front of the car, making a last-second adjustment to the front wing. As Hamilton pulled away, his front right tyre caught the mechanic. It could have been ugly. It was not. The mechanic was unhurt. Hamilton stopped the instant he realised what had happened, and the man walked away fine. The stewards investigated that one too. And this time, they found that Hamilton was in no respect at fault. They fined Ferrari €30,000 for the unsafe release, with 10,000 of that suspended, but they ruled it did not deserve any sporting penalty, and they let Hamilton keep his 4th place. So look at what the FIA actually did across one single afternoon. They penalised Hamilton for the Russell contact, they cleared Hamilton for the pit lane incident, and they fined the team, not the driver, for the tyres. That is not a witch hunt. That is a stewards panel making a call on a first-lap crash that most of the paddock simply disagreed with, which is a different problem and in some ways a bigger one. And here is the part that turns the whole thing bitter for Hamilton fans. Because of all the places on the calendar for this to happen, it happened at his track. Nobody in the history of Formula One has taken more pole positions at Spa than Lewis Hamilton, 6 of them. That is an outright record at this circuit, one that not even Michael Schumacher managed. He holds the Spa qualifying lap record too, a lap he set back in 2020 in the dominant Mercedes, and it still stands to this day. 5 wins here, level with Ayrton Senna and just 1 behind Schumacher. 11 podiums. When people say Hamilton owns Spa, they are not being sentimental. The record book says it out loud. So watching him get spun into the gravel by a moment his car simply would not let him control, and then watching the FIA reach for a penalty on top of it, at the one venue where he has been close to untouchable for a decade, that is what made this one cut so deep. This was supposed to be his weekend. It turned into a courtroom. Step back from the stewards for a second, because there is a much bigger reason this weekend hurts so much, and it has nothing to do with a penalty. Spa is a power circuit. It rewards the cars that can throw everything they have at those long straights and hold it there. And this year, under the new 2026 rules, Ferrari does not have everything. The car has a strong chassis, but the power unit and the way it deploys its electrical energy have been a weakness all season, and Spa dragged that weakness into daylight for everyone to see. The numbers are almost hard to believe. For long stretches of the middle sector, the drivers were running on the combustion engine alone, battery drained, and that leaves a modern Formula One car making somewhere around 540 horsepower. Verstappen put it best. He said that for most of that sector you are running on something close to what a Formula 3 car makes, except you are doing it with full Formula 1 downforce. That is not a compliment. It gets worse when you line it up against last year. Through the quick corners at Pujon, the cars were around 35 km per hour, slower than the year before, and over a single lap, the deficit was around 3.775 seconds. That is an ocean of time in this sport. Hamilton, Verstappen, and Carlos Sainz all came out and criticized the 2026 regulations openly, which tells you this was not one team having a bad day. None of this is new either. Ferrari started the season already reported to be around 30 horsepower down on the Mercedes engine, and the small launch advantage their power unit once had got wiped out by a new pre-start procedure this year. They brought a small engine step earlier in the year, the first piece of their catch-up plan, but at a track like Spa, a handful of horsepower barely registers. So Hamilton arrived at the one track that punishes a weak engine more than any other, in a car built with exactly that weakness, and then lost a chunk of the race to a 5-second penalty on top of it. The deck was stacked before the lights even went out. Ferrari did not come to Spa empty-handed though, and this is where the reporting gets interesting, because they knew exactly what this track would do to them. According to reports out of Italy, the team prepared an evolved version of their rotating rear wing, the one the Paddock has nicknamed the Macarena, designed to shed drag and claw back straight-line speed. The figure being floated is worth around 11 km per hour on the straights, which at Spa is the difference between defending a position and being a sitting duck. There were also reports that Ferrari planned to strip off their blown exhaust flap, the trick device they pioneered over the winter to recover something in the region of 7 horsepower, trading a little rear downforce for a little more speed where they needed it most. Now, exactly how much of that package actually made it onto the cars at Spa was reported as a last-minute, build-dependent decision, so treat the specifics as reported rather than confirmed. But the intent is clear. Ferrari is treating the symptom. They are shaving drag and chasing horsepower at the edges, because the real fix, the thing that would actually close the gap to Mercedes, is not ready yet. And that real fix is the whole story of Ferrari's summer. So where does all of this leave the championship? Because that is what actually matters once the arguing dies down. Kimi Antonelli won the Belgian Grand Prix, and he had to work for it. Charles Leclerc actually led for a big chunk of the afternoon, giving Ferrari fans a reason to dream, before Antonelli hunted him down and took the lead in the closing stages. Leclerc hung on for second, a couple of seconds back, with Verstappen third, Hamilton fourth, and Oscar Piastri fifth. That 6th win of the year puts Antonelli on top of the drivers' standings with 204 points, and he is pulling away. Behind him, and this is the part nobody saw coming on a day like this, Lewis Hamilton is second. His quiet 4th place, penalty and all, nudged him back ahead of Russell, who scored nothing from the gravel. Hamilton has 159 points, Russell 154, and Leclerc sits 4th on 126, leaving Hamilton 45 points behind Antonelli with a long way still to run. And remember, before this weekend, it was Russell sitting second. One lap, one crash that was not even his fault, and he has dropped behind the very driver who hit him. That is how cruel this sport can be when the margins are this thin. The constructors' table is uglier for Ferrari. Mercedes lead on 358 points. Ferrari are second on 285, a full 73 points back. And here is the detail that should worry Maranello most. Even with Russell parked in the gravel on lap 1, even with a full Mercedes retirement, Ferrari clawed back only 5 points across the entire weekend. When your rival has a disaster and you barely gain anything, that is a pace problem, not a luck one. Leclerc leading for as long as he did was the one bright spot, the reminder that on pure chassis, this Ferrari can still run right at the front. But leading for a while does not close a 73-point gap. Wins do, and wins need the engine that is still sitting on a bench in Maranello, which brings us to the fix. The upgrade Ferrari actually needs is a redesigned turbocharger, the second half of their engine catch-up plan, and the reporting says it is aimed at the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort in August, or Monza in September, straight after the summer break. That is the moment Ferrari's biggest weakness is finally supposed to be addressed. And by then, the sport has already confirmed that blown exhaust wings like Ferrari's clever flap will be banned outright for 2027. The trick that helped get them this far is living on borrowed time too. So here is where it all lands. The real question was never whether Lewis Hamilton touched George Russell. He did. Everyone agrees on that, Hamilton included. The real question is whether the FIA just handed out a penalty for the one incident that nobody in the paddock, not the commentators, not the 2 team bosses, not even the driver sitting in the gravel with his season leaking away, actually wanted punished. When the victim is on the same side as the culprit, and the stewards are standing on the other side by themselves, something about the call is off. And there is a bigger question sitting underneath it, the question of consistency. If a first-lap tangle caused by a car losing its own front end is worth a penalty this weekend, what happens the next time 2 cars touch at turn 1 and the stewards wave it through? Drivers need to know where the line sits, and right now, walking away from Spa, nobody seems quite sure. Hamilton walks away from Spa in second place, 45 points down, in a car that is fast everywhere except the places that count the most, with a fix that is still weeks away. Zandvoort is next. And that is where we find out whether this Ferrari can finally turn all of this noise into a real title challenge, or whether Spa was the day the fight quietly started slipping away. We will be breaking down every single bit of it when it happens.